The base is dropped on a new edition of Soccer Down Here. It's a Monday. It's June 1st. It is a very weird time for a lot of things, and I think we all know this. Honestly, I have no mood to be talking soccer right now, but there's a lot of soccer to talk about, and it's not just petty stuff at the moment, and we'll get into all of the latest in the MLS world in just a bit. I don't know. I don't know what's next. I don't know what's now. I don't know what to honestly say about what's different since we left you guys on Friday. I haven't slept a ton. There's incredible sadness. There's anger. There's trying to figure out what to do and trying to figure out how to do things and what to do and where to start and all of this stuff. I think that you guys who know me and know what I have done in my adult life and career, and especially in the soccer world, know absolutely how I feel about where things stand right now. It's been hard to watch nationwide. I'm an Atlanta guy, born and raised, and it's been hard to watch in Atlanta. I think Atlanta has maybe fared better than most because of the heart of what Atlanta is and who it is and what it's been through and what it understands that it wants to be. I think Atlanta has handled this, which is tearing the nation apart and tearing the world apart in a lot of different ways. I hope Atlanta gets through it just like I hope the rest of the country gets through it, and there has to be systemic change in the way that the police deal with the black community. There has to be systemic change in the way we all look at one another. There has to be systemic change in what we think is right and wrong when it comes to people who are different than us, and that's across the board. We have somewhere along the way lost the ability to look past difference, and whether it is as simple as disagreeing about a policy decision that has nothing to do with race or anything like that, is just a difference of opinion. We've somehow lost the ability to respectfully disagree with one another. And before this, you could see that bubbling up. I mean, as I've said, it's just, I think soccer is a special thing that brings people together. And it's one thing to disagree about, did the right back have a good game, things like that. But the lack of ability to talk from different sides, and I'm not talking right and wrong, I'm just talking about different sides in general, has been lost. And does that make other things worse? Absolutely. There are so many things that are wrong and have been spotlighted to be wrong and are on full display right now. And I hope that everybody just, after dealing with whatever your personal reactions are to what we're all seeing every day right now, I hope that everybody does take time to reflect on what's right and wrong. what's the right way forward and do it. And stop wasting time and stop rolling things back and stop scaring the ever-loving hell out of people because they are different than you. Stop. We have to find a way to move forward. We have to regain who we are as human beings. And that has been far too lost over the years. You could argue that we haven't ever had it in this country. I would disagree. I think we have had it and lost it, and it has been a back and forth process. But at its heart, we have to get back to treating other people like we would want ourselves to be treated. It is honestly that freaking simple. And that's what we need to do going forward. And anybody who stands in the way of that needs to be pushed to the side, and their voices need to be shut. It's not about anybody being better than anybody else. It's not about other people not having the same rights that you do. It is not about those things. It is about treating people as they should be treated as human beings. And I hope that we can regain that here at some point. And I hope that we can move forward soon, because the longer this lingers, the worse it's going to get. And leaders have to step up. And leaders are not going to make everybody happy. But leaders have to step up and do what is best for the majority right now of people in this world, and also abide by those very simple basics that we are all the same. It's a little too easy right now to trash people because of a statement that was missing a word or didn't have a word or didn't word it the way you wanted. We can't trash the people who are trying to bring about positive change. We have to work with the people who want this place to be better. And we have to find the ways to work together. People have different opinions on how to do that. People will have a million different opinions on how to fix the police, how to keep them from killing people, how to keep them from shooting at the media, how to keep them from doing these different things that have come to the fore over the last few days, and some of this stuff has been going on for decades and decades and decades. People are going to have different ways on how to fix it. Don't tear each other apart over those differences. Find the people who are trying to bring about positive change and treat people the right way and work with them. I saw a lot of negativity about Arthur Blank's statement here in Atlanta, and I'm kind of blown away by it, because this is somebody who has done more positively for the city than a lot of people in Atlanta's history. You can quibble with wordsmithing, and you can quibble with, should this word have been there, and should this word have not, and should this have been worded differently? If you've been paying attention, you know where his heart is. You know where his dollars have been. You know where his actions have been. Maybe I take it a little personally because I've seen it firsthand. And yes, I do get paid essentially by Arthur Blank right now. I'm not telling you this because of that. I'm telling you this because I have been on the ground in communities that he has not just thrown money at, like, we've seen a lot of times. And there's nothing wrong with throwing money to people who need money. There's nothing wrong with that. But Arthur's went further than that and created programming and tried to do things to better communities. Has he done it perfectly? No, nobody does. Nobody knows everything that's going to happen. Nobody can predict everything. Do people make mistakes? Yes, we're all freaking humans. But right now, people are trashing good people. People who are trying to bring about good, positive things, and we've got to stop doing that. If an athlete doesn't word something the proper way, or if somebody doesn't have the same experiences and doesn't know how to react, and people don't know what to say, there's not an American Idol judging process here over who is making the right statement and they win the day. Statements and those things don't win the day. It's about bringing about positive change. And people who are on the same page and trying to bring that about need to work together. That's where we're at right now. There's a lot bigger things than saying somebody lost a PR statement. Are they trying to do good things? Let's work with them. Let's move forward. Are they trying to understand? As I've seen college coaches and high school coaches and people who don't understand, but have made it clear that they're trying to. Don't get mad at them for not understanding. Be happy that they're trying to. And I hope that people who don't understand and don't know what's going on right now and don't get it, talk to people, listen to people, find some empathy in trying to put yourself in other people's shoes, and maybe we can all drag this country and drag all of us out of this if we will be willing to work together and do that. Now is not the time for yelling about, well, this person didn't make a statement fast enough, or this person didn't say this word, or whatever. Those things are not important right now. Who's trying to bring about positive change? Let's do this, and let's move forward. And make it in your life and in your community and in your circle. That's what we can all control individually. And the people who are trying to do bigger things, who are doing it in the right way and their heart is in the right place, support them and work with them. Anger is understandable right now. Fear is understandable right now. Sadness is absolutely understandable right now. All of those things are real, and they're real feelings. But we've got to harness that, use our ability to work together, and remember that we are all human beings, whether we are of different colors, whether we are from different places, whether we believe in different things, whether we vote differently, any of these things. We have to work together to make the best of the world that we have, period. And people who don't want to do that and don't want to work with people do need to be pushed to the side. People who want to work together need to come together to do this. That's where we're at. And I hope that this week is not like the last few days. I hope that progress is made. I hope that leaders emerge. I hope that leaders who do emerge are supported by people who see that they are trying to bring about positive change. And I hope that we get that positive change, at least the steps we need along the way. It's a must. That's where we're at right now. It's a scary time. Never seen anything like this in my 43 years on this planet. And I hope we don't ever see it again. And I hope that we learn from this, because that's the important thing. And I have rambled on way too long, but I do not know exactly how to put this into a perfect 5-line post. I don't know how to put this into the perfectly worded statement. I don't have that ability about this. I'm hurting like you guys. I am sad like you guys. I'm angry like you guys. I don't want to see this continue. And I want to find the ways to change that. And what I can control is the good that I try to put out into the world. I want to pump a lot of sunshine right now. I want to try to bring good things to people. I wish we had good things to talk about in the soccer world, but obviously we don't. And we're going to talk about that too here in just a little bit. But there's some bigger things going on right now, and it's okay to not really care about what happens with soccer at the moment. It's okay. And if you're out there listening just because you're listening out of habit and you don't like this part of opening, well, look, I mean, that's where we are today. I've always tried to be real with you guys who listen. This is me right now, and it's been hard these last few days, but I'm trying to get through it. I'm trying to help bring about whatever good positivity to people that I possibly can, and sometimes that's hard, and that's your glimpse into my brain this morning. We'll see. We'll work together and try to change it, and we will do the best we can, but thanks for bearing with me for about 15 minutes of rambling. John, go ahead.
I think this past weekend we saw a lot of people who want to take the same steps that you do. When you look at a mayor who here in Atlanta looks at things through a bunch of different prisms, and you see someone who is invested in the future of her family and her friends and her community and who she can influence. When you saw folks like T.I. and Killer Mike who were invested and absolutely cared, and you could hear and you could see the raw emotion that they put forward because of how they're invested in a bunch of different ways. We saw that not just in press conferences. We saw that with folks across this country about how they care about their future. They want to invest. They want to invest physically, emotionally, what have you. But to have all of these different people, all of these different voices coming out here, it has to lend itself to a direction of change. You have a lot of people who want to walk in that way. And the biggest thing right now, and my voice is shaking because I'm trying to not become overly emotional about this, because this past weekend was hard. When you see a lot of people who are invested and you see a lot of people who want to walk in the same direction, it is the toughest thing sometimes to take that next step. You've taken that first one, then it's into taking the next one. And so with all of the people around us, all of the people that we touch every single day, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention, and it's a simple verse. Love your neighbor as yourself. Don't love them for this or this or this or this or this. Just love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that that's just as key going forward in all of this. We all see something, work toward it. That, to me, is the bottom line in all of this. And I think that we saw a lot of different folks this past weekend who want to work toward change, who are voicing that element that they want to get toward it. Let's all get toward that, and let's all work in that direction and see the vision of that country that we want to see.
Yeah. Man, I mean, I'm seeing things like scoreboards on which teams are making statements and which statements are good, and stop. That's not what's important right now, y'all. It's about the actions. It's about what we're doing to change this. It's about not being where we are right now, not being, honestly, where we've been for a little while. Gotta be better. That's just what it comes down to. Let's keep everybody updated on what's going on in the soccer world. We do have some updates on MLS that have happened very recently, and we'll get there in just a second. Real quick around the world, just a quick update. La Liga is officially set for June 11. They're going to move forward. They've got their fixture list. All is progressing the way they expected it to. In England, the championship is set for June 20th, but some people are saying that they did not know this was coming. There was no consultation. We'll see how that gets handled. Scotland, there could be some money coming into play that would help that league get through things. Portugal, you've got Porto trying to find a €2 million loan to pay salaries. They say that they've got money coming from UEFA. They ultimately found a bank that would give it to them. In Brazil, you've got Vasco da Gama with 16 positive cases of COVID-19. 43 players were tested across the club, 16 positive tests. Brazil is a really scary place when it comes to coronavirus right now. Very scary, and it's going to have a huge impact on the soccer world in Brazil. The big news is MLS, though, and that's where we're going to have to spend most of the show here. If you guys have questions about what's come out and what's going on, please let us know on Twitter at SoccerDownHere, at Longshoe, at OSG Nelson. Last night, about 8:40, the MLS Players Association released a statement. It said, "This evening, MLS players voted to approve a package of economic concessions for the 2020 season, modifications to the recently agreed-upon CBA, including its extension by a year, and their agreement to participate in a summer tournament in Orlando." I had heard some things on Friday that were absolutely in line with that things were moving forward to an announcement about MLS's plans in Orlando very, very soon. So when I did see this come through last night, I wasn't surprised. Thought it was good news. Everything was moving forward. Not so fast. Herculez Gomez tweeted out, what time was that? I want to say it was about midnight Eastern time. I'm going to get the exact timeline because it is important here. It was at 11:47, close to it. Herculez Gomez of ESPN tweeted that I'm hearing MLS has given MLSPA till Tuesday at noon to accept their final proposal. If they refuse, the players would be locked out. I reached out to a high-ranking official within the league who respectfully declined to comment. So you see the Players Association say they've sent back a proposal, and then 3 hours later you see this, and it's confusing, and it's like, what is going on? Jeff Carlisle broke it down further on ESPN and said that the Players Association voted to approve its latest counteroffer. That was what was announced at 8:40. According to multiple sources of Carlisle's, MLS has pushed back on that. They insisted that their last offer was their best offer, that they wouldn't budge further, and then Gomez talked about the lockout possibility. I am not happy about a lockout being thrown around as a threat at all. I don't like that at all. We'll get into some of the reasons why that would even be coming up here in just a minute. So a source of Carlisle's called that threat a disingenuous act, especially given how much the MLSPA has offered. Back and forth about the statement. And here's the main differences on where things stand. And I think it's important to get into the details here. And this is why maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm just hopeful. Maybe my fingers are crossed. But I feel like these things are able to be worked out. One is more difficult, and we'll get there in a second. The pay cut. MLSPA came back with 7.5% in their counter proposal. The MLS most recent offer was at 8.75 before that. We're talking 1.25% of a difference. That should not hold up a deal. That should be able to be resolved. The revenue sharing plan about a broadcast rights deal, the next broadcast rights deal, the CBA that was agreed upon before all of this, 25% of the net increase in media revenue that exceeds $100 million above 2022 levels, the last year of the current deal. That 25% of the net increase that exceeds $100 million would go into salary budget, general allocation money, which is salary budget, salary cap, on a per-team basis. The argument now is because things are different. MLS wanted to delay that by a year initially. They've moved on from that. MLS's offer was 10% of the increase in 2023, the first year of a new rights deal, then the 25% the following year. The union countered with 17% in the first year and then 25% the following year. A 7% difference of a net increase in media revenue that exceeds $100 million of the existing deal, the current deal. That, again, feels like a number that you can work through and find a resolution on. Health and safety protocols related to Orlando. The Athletic had reported that that's largely been worked out. Players can opt out, or players could opt out. Chicharito, Carlos Vela are two players who have been mentioned. Their partners are pregnant. They might skip the tournament because of that. That's okay. For the most part, the particulars of the tournament are set. Now, Carlisle reports it as a 3-game group stage that would be followed by a knockout round. I had heard the 5-game thing was still the plan. I don't know where they are. Either way, they were pretty much on the same page about all of that stuff. You have the 2 percentage differences that are important, but seem like you can get to a level playing field here. The biggest issue, in my opinion, is the potential to add a force majeure clause. And I'm going to read you what Carlisle wrote in his piece. This is complicated, and we'll try to make sense of it. A bigger sticking point relates to the force majeure clause that would allow either side to back out of a CBA in the case of a catastrophic event like a pandemic. MLS's proposal gives it the right to invoke the clause if 5 teams suffer an attendance drop of 25% or more from the previous year, while the MLSPA's doesn't have that stipulation. One question I have is, does the MLSPA counteroffer have a force majeure clause? Carlisle's wording there, it could be either way. I read it as it does, but it doesn't have that stipulation to it. It doesn't have the 25% drop of 5 teams. Look, that's too low, in my opinion, on its own. If it is in conjunction with something, it's a different conversation, and I don't know. But if it's just, if 5 teams have an attendance drop of 25%, that a force majeure clause could be activated in breaking contracts, it's too low. Because 5 teams can have a 25% drop in attendance due to a bad season, due to a series of bad seasons, due to a move that is unpopular with the fan base, due to a major player leaving the team, due to a coach being fired, due to a lot of different things. If it is by itself that can just be activated anytime, that doesn't make any sense, and that should not be part of it. If it is a force majeure clause that is an element of it in the event of a pandemic, in the event of something else, then it's a different conversation. I still think it's too low. I don't know where the negotiation is here, because I'm not 100% sure if the MLSPA proposal that they approved last night has a force majeure clause. I think it does from the way this is worded, but I'm not 100% sure. If it does, and they have the ability to do it in the event of a pandemic or whatever the wording is, and they don't have that 25% drop, but the MLS one does have it in the event of a pandemic, and that's one of the triggers for it. If it's a trigger for something in the event of something else, it's a different conversation than it's just, if you have 5 teams that have a big attendance drop, then you can break contracts. If that's in isolation, that doesn't make any sense. And no, that should not be part of the deal. If it is, that happens because of a pandemic or because of something else, then it's a different conversation. I still think the bar is too low, but it's a different conversation than force majeure clauses. We've talked about them a decent bit during this. Some deals, some CBAs have them, some don't. Some league contracts with players have them, some don't. It's not something that has been implemented in contracts across the board. I do not know of an organization in the world that has used that yet. Can you think of one, John, that anybody has cited a force majeure clause to break a contract or get out of one right now?
Not in the extent of that being a force majeure act of God kind of a thing. I mean, there are other clauses that are inserted in contracts with individuals that cause you to break them, but the
I'm
idea
talking
of
about during the pandemic. Have you heard of anybody using that at this point?
No, not at all.
I haven't either.
I have not.
It's come up. It's been talked about, especially in terms of, does this contract have it? Does this deal have it? Is it something this league has? But I haven't actually heard it implemented. The other thing that would be my question about this element of this agreement would be, is it the way Carlisle read it? I'm gonna read this one more time. MLS's proposal gives it the right to invoke the clause if 5 teams suffer an attendance drop of 25% or more from the previous year. Doesn't say that it is automatically invoked. The right is given to the league to do it.
Yeah,
that is an important part here. It's a bargaining ploy. It's the ability to rebargain if you have this happen. Again, I think the bar's too low either way. If it is in conjunction with a pandemic or whatever other act of God we're going to include in that clause, it's not as big of a bar. It's not as big of an issue, but it's still, I think, too low of a bar. That's the one that worries me, because it's something that we've never seen implemented during this pandemic yet. It's something that is a big measure, and it's something that is a big unknown right now with this, on both sides of it. that's going to be the toughest part to negotiate because there's no precedent. There's no history of it. It's never been part of this before. I don't know where the MLSPA feels on it. I don't know if they are okay with a force majeure clause in the event of a pandemic or another act of God, but they don't like the attendance element to it. Then what would be the trigger for it to be invoked? That would be the question. I do still feel like this is something that can be worked out, but that's the trickier element to be worked out. I'm really surprised that it went from conversations Friday that looked very positive, conversations early Sunday that looked very positive, to the threat of a lockout that was made last night. Something's not clicking here. I don't know what it is, and I was wondering initially if there was a disconnect, if there was something that was not, in line here. But according to Paul Tenorio this morning, because of where things stand, and his tweet was just a little while ago at 8:22. In light of the league's latest negotiating stance, multiple sources indicate all MLS players will refuse to participate in voluntary training sessions that were scheduled in home markets across the league today. Atlanta and Sporting Kansas City were approved to take the next step to the group individual training, because it's still individual training. It's just they could work together 10 yards apart. That's serious. That takes it to another level. Both sides need to sort this out. Big time. Yeah, big time. No doubt. Because it feels like they can.
Yeah. And I think it is the two that are dealing with percentages to me are the easier, and I'm going to put that word in quotation marks, the easier ones, I think, to tackle. This one involving force majeure and the attendance, that one to me is the one that is going to have the most work, because how do you measure your metrics? Because we know in leagues, when it comes to attendances, and teams will sit there, they will measure tickets sold instead of butts in seats. That metric to me has to be figured out when you're looking at attendance. I think that the percentages, we were going through this morning, and you could already sit here and look at some teams that are having attendance problems because of a lack of success or a lack of interest or both on the field. And I think that having 5 out of an entire league, I think it's too low a number, because I was going through the league and I sat there and I came up with 8 teams that have either cavernous venues and people not going, or just people not going.
But hold on, that's not the issue. And this needs to be made clear, and I think it's been twisted a little bit in the conversation around it. It's not 5 teams with bad attendance. It's 5 teams with a drop of 25% of their attendance. Yeah. And how many teams had a 25% drop in their attendance in 2019 from 2018? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the New York Red Bulls are struggling to draw. Well, they're already struggling to draw. Like, they're not going to have another 25% drop, you wouldn't think. If they do, that's a big problem for the Red Bulls. But are you going to have 5 teams that drop that far? I don't think the likelihood of that is quite as strong. Now, in a global pandemic or whatever other act of God, if they are tied together, and that's where I'm not 100% sure.
Right.
If they are tied together, it's a different conversation than if it is just, if you have 5 teams that have an attendance drop, you can break your contracts. That doesn't feel like what a force majeure clause is. Now, you can write whatever clause you want into it, but that doesn't feel like where this negotiation is. I don't know. Again, I'm not there. But this part doesn't make a lot of sense for me. I think the other element, and this is something I mentioned before that we would get into, there's some real conversations about MLS finances that have to be had as part of all this. There's no way around it, and you can't leave it out of the conversation, as I've seen it left out. you've got, and this is according to the Forbes numbers, and which are not from the books, which are not 100% accurate, but the league combined with a couple of teams that were losing more. A couple of teams lost a pretty large percentage of the losses, but around $100 million last season, or 2018, I think is the numbers they were pulling from. Okay. You lost that. Now you're going to wipe out, is Cincinnati the weird team that's got 90% of their revenue from match day? Are they the only ones? I don't think so. What's the league number on that? I don't know. It's high. And you're going to wipe that out. So the losses this year in MLS, percentage-wise, are going to be larger than any other league in this country. They're going to be larger than every other major league. They're going to be larger than every major college conference. They're probably going to be as large as any league in the world, percentage-wise, not straight up money, because it's a different conversation for MLS and the Premier League. Percentage-wise, as it was said in the USA Today article, it's a lost year. It's a lost year financially for MLS. Even if you get some people in the stands later on, that's going to help. But it's a lost year. That's why we're talking about this. This isn't the league all of a sudden, after negotiating a CBA and saying, yes, we agree to this. Oh, no, we don't. There's some things that are causing the ground to move here. And that has to be part of this conversation. Otherwise, you're not looking at it objectively. Does that justify some of the back and forth? The force majeure clause is the one I have an issue with. Whatever the percent, 1.25% either way on the salary pay cut, come on, that's manageable. That 1.25% is important to players making a smaller amount, obviously. It is an important point, but that's a negotiable point. The 7% difference on the net money that is more than what the last rights deal was, over $100 million in 1 year of the deal, that amount, again, it's a negotiable point. The force majeure clause is a more complicated one, and that's the one that they need to get worked out and be right on this, because this is an important issue. Do we expect to have another global pandemic? Well, I hope we don't. I hope we don't have to go through this stuff again. I hope we don't have to go through this one again. We might. That's why leagues are talking like they are. That's why owners are talking like they are. That's why the sports world as a whole is having a lot of problems right now in the business side, because this is happening. You can't avoid it. So is that changing how people want to do business going forward? Yeah, probably. And that's why, again, people have to get in the room and sort this out. And get in the Zoom room, get in the virtual room and sort this out. Because those things are real. This is not somebody just being unreasonable out of nowhere. These are real issues. These are real losses that teams are going to have to deal with. At a point where, owners who had been in the game for a while were starting to see some return on it and starting to reinvest. I think Robert Kraft with the Revolution is a prime example of that. The league and owners who have been in the league as long as Kraft, as long as the Hunts, as long as Anschutz, they're probably only now starting to see some of that return on their long-term investment. And now it's going to get wiped away. And that's hard. That's difficult for a business owner, period. Even if they're a multimillionaire like some of these owners are. It's still difficult. It's still a huge loss. It still affects the long-term viability of the business. And that is a question. And again, I think we've had a different conversation in the United States about this because we're not used to the fear and potential of a team going out of business. We haven't seen it in a major league here since the 70s, the hockey team. We haven't seen it since then, and even if you want to go through the history of the leagues, it didn't happen on a regular basis. Going back to the basketball leagues that came together to form the NBA, looking at the ABA, which was an upstart league, The NFL in its early years had all kinds of moves and teams going out of business and leaving. Baseball really hasn't had a ton of it over its history. I mean, you're going to the 1800s for teams that would come and go. It's not something we're used to. It's real right now. And it's real for MLS because, some of these owners have a lot of net worth. Net worth. Do you think their teams are worth the same amount right now? Probably not. That's going to affect that. It's going to affect all of this. It doesn't make it justified to treat the players badly. Don't get me wrong. And these are things that are a big part of this as well. Doing the right thing is a very important thing here. But the business negotiation of it is not coming from an unknown place. It's a very known place. If you are talking about a league that lost $100 million over the last period of time that we have a guess on what that is, and now you're going to add $1 billion loss, multiple $1 billion loss on top of that? That's not how businesses usually stay open. And I don't think MLS is going away. I don't think any MLS teams are going away. But you're asking the owners to do a season with basically no revenue and do it for the good of the game and do it for what's coming down the road, which I think is important. I think MLS can bounce back from this. I think the losses now are an investment in the long-term future of the league. I absolutely believe that. But the losses now are real. They're not imaginary. They're not fictional, and they're part of this conversation, and it feels like they've been completely left out. The losses in MLS are different than the losses in Major League Baseball. We're talking about different economics of scale. We're talking about different things entirely. A baseball team, even some of the more poorly run teams that we've heard numbers on, 40% of your revenue from game day, about 40% has been the going number. 90% in MLS. You do the math. There's not a whole lot of 10% of revenue that was already low and as across the league not turning positive. And we can argue about, is that true? Is that not true? Should you include the Soccer United marketing money into it? We can argue about that all day. But the soccer teams, there's not a whole lot of them making a whole lot of money. And now you're going to take 90% of the revenue off the top. That's difficult to handle. And that's where we're at. That's why you're having difficult conversations. I think it is important to have the whole conversation about this so you can figure out, okay, now how do we solve it? How do we solve a 1.25% difference in payroll? How do we solve a 7% difference in 1 year when you're talking about an increase in rights fees? And how do you handle inserting a force majeure clause that has never been part of this conversation? What are the terms that it could be invoked under? That's what needs to be handled right now. It's not a bunch of posturing. It's not a bunch of back and forth. It's not a bunch of yelling. It's not a bunch of one side is 100% right and the other side is the rich people that are rich. They're losing money during this. They're affecting the business of it. You have to solve the problem together. And it's not going to be easy, but it can be done if you work together in this scenario and get it done. I think even the force majeure clause is something that can get handled, but you've got to be real about it and you've got to clearly define what can have it invoked. And I don't think 5 teams out of nowhere, if it is completely isolated from a pandemic or whatever other act of God that would allow this to be invoked, if it is just 5 teams have a big drop in attendance at 25%, you can invoke it and break contracts. No, that makes no sense whatsoever. If it is in conjunction with an act of God, it's a different conversation. I still think it's too low of a bar, but it is a very different conversation. That needs to be clarified. That is a massive point here, and it's an important one here. So we will see. We will see what else comes out today, but it sounds like MLS has progressed from the working together, seeming to be on the same page, to the anger side of this negotiation. We've seen this happen a lot of times. I hope this side is really short. and I hope both sides make their points clearly and work together for the good of the game, because nobody will benefit. Players, managers, staff, teams. No one will benefit from MLS not getting back on the field. No one.
Doing some quick legal research, going down the force majeure rabbit hole, 5 separate states have state-specific requirements dealing with force majeure clauses in addition to just something that you would put in there in a contract. There are 5 states that have specific ideas that have to be attached to it to make sure that you would garner the judgment.
Did you have any of the things that have to be attached to it? I mean, is it always in the event of something out of control? Is it always in the event of an act of God, a weather-related event, a global pandemic, et cetera, et cetera?
They deal with specific events. I'll give you the greatest hits here. New York law, the clause lists the specific event claimed to be preventing performance. So this particular law firm says some force majeure clause would list epidemic or pandemic, goes through the CDC definition. If it's an epidemic or pandemic, coronavirus could be covered as an act of governmental authority in some areas. In New York, the force majeure event must be unforeseen, and the party seeking to invoke the clause must attempt to perform its contractual duties despite the event. In Texas, it doesn't require that the force majeure event be unforeseeable. In Florida...
Is there any more on Texas? Because that's an interesting one to me, that it doesn't have to be unforeseeable, because...
Okay.
What are the clauses there?
Okay, it says under Texas law, unless expressly included in a contract, parties seeking to invoke force majeure to excuse non-performance are not required to exercise reasonable diligence to perform or overcome the force majeure event. If the parties contracted for this, however, determining whether a party exercised reasonable diligence is fact-intensive must be assessed on a case-by-case basis. Reasonable diligence, in quotes, defined under Texas law as such diligence that an ordinarily prudent and diligent person would exercise under similar circumstances, end quote.
That feels very open-ended compared to what we're generally seeing. Again, generally. Some examples of force majeure events that are enumerated in contracts: acts of God, like we've talked about, severe acts of nature or weather events, war, acts of terrorism, epidemics, acts of governmental authorities, strikes and labor disputes, certain accidents. Economic hardship typically is not enough to qualify as a force majeure event on its own. And this is from Ackerman.com.
Right, that's what I'm reading. I'm
okay.
Right there with you.
So it feels like just an attendance drop would not be enough to typically create a force majeure clause. That's right. Why I'm asking the question: is it the issues, the events? Let's just take this one and boilerplate it. So we take these events, we put them into the contract. Is it, if these things happen and a 25% drop in attendance for 5 teams, that shouldn't be by itself to trigger a force majeure clause, and that's not typical that it would be. That clarification, I think, is an important thing that needs to come out from this, and hopefully when they get a final deal done, we'll get that information, because it's an important element of the conversation, and it's hard to evaluate it without it.
The Ackerman analysis, it gave 5 states that have those requirements: New York, Florida, California, Texas, and Illinois. Their end analysis at Ackerman was businesses seeking to invoke force majeure of their contracts likely have a strong argument that the coronavirus outbreak is an unforeseen event unless the parties entered into the contract after the outbreak. Mm-hmm. Whether businesses have also attempted to perform their contractual duties despite the outbreak, and whether that's even required under a particular contract, are questions that have to be assessed on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, this is This is going to be interesting. I wanted to see this on the NBA because I think the NBA has a force majeure clause, and I wanted to see exactly if there was any detail on it. Here we go. In the CBA, it does. The force majeure clause permits the NBA to terminate the CBA and reduce teams' obligations to pay players for games that are canceled on account of a qualifying cataclysmic event. An epidemic would be one of those. They have 60 days from the beginning of the event to notify the union that it will declare the force majeure. So you could read that to say that it has to be something that is 60 days long. That might not necessarily be the case, but I could read it that way. In the NBA, we're past the 60-day part of it. I don't know if they notified them that they would declare it, and now they're negotiating it. I don't know the NBA situation. It hasn't come up a lot in recent weeks on the NBA back to play conversation. They have one. I don't know if the NFL had one.
They do not.
They do not. Major League Baseball?
Efforting.
Okay. I don't know, but the way it would be activated is important, because the conversation that I'm seeing about this is taking it like, if there's 5 teams that have a 25% drop in attendance, no matter what, if everything is sunny and the weather's great every game, and you have that, then you could activate and invoke a force majeure clause. That's not typically how force majeure clauses are created. They are typically in place to deal with an event like this that is separate from an attendance drop. And that's an important part here, because it's a very different conversation. If the conversation is MLS can invoke it when 5 teams have a bad year, a very bad year, a very, very bad year, because that's not common. That's not a typical clause. If it is, MLS can invoke it if this happens, and oh yeah, by the way, there is a war or terrorist attack or global epidemic or pandemic or whatever, all these different things. If it is this and this, it's a different conversation than if it's just 5 teams have a cataclysmic drop in attendance separate from anything else. Those are 2 very different conversations.
From our friends at Foley and Lardner, LLP. In the case of Major League Baseball, the CBA is silent with respect to the parties' rights in the event games are postponed, suspended, or canceled outright due to a pandemic. In fact, words and phrases like force majeure, act of God, pandemic, epidemic, or virus are not included in the MLB CBA. Paragraph 11 of the Uniform Players Contract provides that the contract is subject to federal or state legislation, regulations, executive or other official orders, or other governmental action. And then it goes into boldface print. Subject also to the right of the commissioner to suspend the operation of this contract during any national emergency during which Major League Baseball is not played. Emphasis was added by Foley and Lardner. So, Foley and Lardner, this LLP legal firm, says when the president declared the state of emergency March 13th, Commissioner Manfred effectively had the right to suspend immediately all player contracts, including any payment obligations of the clubs, indefinitely for the period of time during which a state of emergency was in effect, games not being played.
And they have not. They have not cut player pay yet.
No.
And MLS has not cut player pay either. How many teams do you think had a 25% drop in attendance last year?
Oh, yeah, see, I would probably venture 4.
4?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go from the bottom up.
Okay.
Chicago Fire, worst team in the league with attendance last year. 12,324. 17% drop. Colorado Rapids, next, 14-2. 7% drop. FC Dallas, 14-8. 4% drop. Columbus Crew, big drop. Or no, big add, actually. They went up to 19%, sorry. But they had an awful 2018 because, they might not have existed past 2018. A little different.
Right.
Houston Dynamo, 7% drop. Montreal Impact, 13% drop. Revolution, 9% drop because they were horrendous at the beginning of the season.
Right.
That rebounded as the year went on. New York Red Bulls, 7% drop. Sporting Kansas City, 7% drop. Minnesota United, 17% drop, but they went from a big venue to a smaller venue that has a different capacity. And They still didn't hit this. Vancouver, as bad as Vancouver was last year and as many issues as they had, 11%. Nobody had a 25% drop from 2018 to 19. It didn't happen. The largest one in the league was Chicago at a 17% drop. Double-digit drops from 18 to 19. Chicago, Montreal,
yes,
Vancouver, Minnesota, which is a different conversation.
Right.
That's it.
3.
That's it. Double-digit. Nobody to 20. Kind of missed that point during all this conversation that this is such a likely event. It's not. Now, the threat / speculation has been put out there that, oh, well, if MLS wanted to do this, then they would just accurately report their attendance. What would be the benefit from that? Let's work through this if that's going to be put out there in this way. What would be the benefit to MLS doing what all leagues do and finding whatever mechanism it is to report the attendance as high as they possibly can? Why do you do that? Sponsorship, perception, image, all those different things. That's why it happens. Okay. If, for example, Atlanta has had attendance, and this is from the Georgia World Congress Center. This was from the open records at the AJC. Atlanta United had a smaller percentage of people in the building, or a smaller number of people in the building than was reported. It was a much different reporting than the Falcons had. It was not the same at all. But was there a slight difference? Yeah. And this was people through the turnstiles. That was people literally through the turnstiles. And one of the arguments back and forth was that that's not including people who are coming in through other means, through other passes, what have you. Look, I don't know. It's not a 25% difference. It's not any close to a 25% difference. And what would be the benefit to MLS to do that? And again, we're assuming that this clause is in this agreement between the two parties, the players and the league, with no element of an act of God, an act of war, an act of a pandemic, just that 5 teams have a drop, you can break the CBA. Okay, we're going to assume that for a second. So then the speculation, the fear is, well, then MLS would just say 5 teams had a drop, and they just accurately report their attendance. I don't think MLS is inflating attendance by 25% anywhere. I think that's craziness. Look in the stands. Even though, yes, there are some numbers that it's like, hey, Red Bulls, really? Are there 5 teams? I don't think there are. What would you benefit from that? You'd be able to break the CBA. Again, if it's on its own, separate from an act of God, separate from a pandemic. But you would be destroying your credibility long term. You would be destroying your image in the American sports landscape and in the world soccer landscape to get out of a CBA. Is that worth it? Really? No, it's not. And I think it's reckless to suggest that it is. It's not worth it. The benefit is not enough to do that. Whatever the hang-ups are, and it feels like this is the most complicated hang-up that has been cited. It needs to get worked out. It needs to get worked out soon. It's not going to help MLS to quibble over this and argue over this and not play. MLS is the one league, maybe in the world, that is staring at... I'm going to try to be conservative on these numbers. MLS is the one league in the world that is staring at a 70% drop in revenue and is talking about playing. I mean, 70% drop in revenue with no match day if you don't have fans in the stands this year, and they're looking at playing. They're the only ones. That's it. Because it's not like even the A-League in Australia, which we've talked about those financial issues. They got 6 games left. They got the playoffs. They got another year coming. MLS is looking at this after most teams have played 1 home game. You're wiping 16 home games off of revenue. Might you get some of that back at the end to a smaller degree? Maybe. It seems like there's more talk about smaller percentages being in the stands as we go. I don't know how strongly I feel about that after what we've seen over the last week. I don't know if that's going to be possible if there is another outbreak, if there is an increase in numbers. But look, you're going to lose 16 events, period. Most countries, Scotland, for example, which people have argued that the Scottish Premiership and MLS are really equivalent. I don't think they are in terms of quality, but Scotland is not playing because of the financials. They are not playing because they can't afford to. They're not playing the rest of their season because they cannot afford to do it. MLS is talking about doing it when maybe they've got some owners who can afford to, but as separate businesses, they can't afford to do it. And they are talking about doing it. They've got to find the way to do it. And they've got to work with the players, and they've got to give them what they need, and they've got to sort this out, but they've got to do it soon to move forward. This is a bad look to have the hint of a lockout. It's a bad look. You can fix it quickly. Go ahead.
Yeah. Tafka, our resident barrister on force majeure, he says, in his professional opinion, MLS is abusing the spirit of force majeure with the 5-club.
If that is separate from an act of God, that is again a very important element of this that I don't have the answer to. If it is standalone, 5 teams, 25% drop, that's it. No act of God involved. Nothing, because a force majeure is basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tafka, and any other lawyers out there, it is basically a remedy to protect a business who has formed a contractual agreement in the case of something outside of their control. That's what it's there for. Yeah. I don't think you can argue that the attendance is outside of their control. That's different. That's why I agree with Tafka if it is not tied to an act that is outside of their control, which is not typical for a force majeure clause. So that's the question I have. In the agreement, it sounds like the players have put forward a force majeure clause or agreed to some element of a force majeure clause, but not this element of it. So trying to connect the dots, it sounds like there is a force majeure clause that is tied to what we typically know a force majeure clause is, but this is an element that would allow MLS to invoke it. If I'm wrong and there's information out there to change that, please let me know.
Yeah.
But it's unclear. If it's strictly just to fix an attendance drop, no, that shouldn't be in there. It doesn't make sense, even though nobody last year hit that number. It didn't happen. If this then and this happens, then we can invoke it, then we're having a very different conversation.
Yeah. Tafka says force majeure exists to release contractual liability if the contract, if extraordinary circumstances prevent one or both parties from completing it.
Yep.
He says, he says it should not be linked to attendance, especially not a mere 25% drop. Pretty disappointed in my league right now, as you've well destroyed the goodwill you built in reaching a CBA so reasonably with the players. To hold out and potentially lock out now is disgusting. Tafka's words.
Yeah, but again, we don't have the whole story here. And that's when we're getting to the point that we're upset with the league over this. Look, the league's looking at huge losses. Those are facts, and you can't leave those out of this conversation. The force majeure clause, if it is typical and that is an element of it, then it's a lot more reasonable than if it's separate. If it is separate, I'm with you. It doesn't make sense. And that's why it doesn't make sense that the league and the Players Association would go from working together, getting the CBA done, agreed to. You didn't get to finalize it because of things outside of everybody's control, like a pandemic. But you were able to get things done because you worked together, to now being completely and utterly unreasonable. You know, like that doesn't make sense. One thing that could cause that to change would be the catastrophic losses you're looking at. Yes. I don't know if that's enough, because this seems like a fixable point, especially if it is tied to that act of something outside of the league's control. And that's what I would want clarification on, because I don't even know if a force majeure clause is necessarily valid in the case of just an attendance drop, unless you're arguing that that would be tied to something.
Yeah.
Like a pandemic, like a war, like whatever. Hurricanes, tornadoes. Like you'd have to tie it to something across the league. And there's not a lot you can tie it to make it make sense. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking for something in here that's not there. I don't know, but it doesn't connect for me. And I'd love more information on it. And I don't know if we'll get it or not, but it seems like there's more to it than just, 25% drop, which, again, didn't happen from 2018 to 19, period. Even with some teams that were bad and borderline unwatchable, you didn't have it. So why would you have it out of thin air now? There's no benefit to MLS uncooking the numbers, spoiling the numbers, to hit that clause, because the punishment they're going to get from that outweighs whatever benefit they would get from being able to break a CBA that they had already negotiated. Like, they wouldn't just do it out of thin air. Like, that doesn't make... It doesn't click. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and going through this Ackerman piece that you and I have referenced this morning, I think in some states, the players might actually, have a case if it was to if they were to challenge a force majeure, because it looks like it's fairly difficult.
It wouldn't, but you wouldn't be able to even put it into a national contract if it's not going to fly in every state. That's why, again, I don't think it's just a standalone thing tied to attendance.
Yeah, there's got to be something else there that it's locked into, instead of sitting there and saying, okay, well, we're just going to put this in here and tie it to an attendance drop that hasn't happened. So that, to me, it's something that's not here, that we're missing a piece, and I don't know what that piece is.
If it is an attendance drop that we have not seen in this league, and I'll have to look back historically, but I don't think it's ever happened where 5 teams have had a 25% attendance drop. But if you have to have that because of that uncontrollable element that happens, that is the typical force majeure clause, then we're having a very different conversation. If you're just taking the attendance part of it out of context and putting it out there and saying that, well, yeah, MLS is trying to have this happen, that's really wrong. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, why would you do that? It doesn't make sense that it would be a standalone.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, maybe I'm just trying to find some positivity because I'd like to have some MLS action to see this season and make it happen. Maybe I'm just trying to blind myself from things, but I am not seeing how this would even make sense or be maybe even legal to have it as a standalone, not connected to an act of God or weather or what have you that would typically be in a force majeure clause.
Yeah.
Am I off base?
No, no.
I feel like I'm missing something, and I don't understand it.
Yeah, there's something here that isn't here, if that makes any sense. And there's a piece of this puzzle that we're missing from the owner's perspective in this in this proposal as to why all of a sudden this would be a linchpin that could cause the entire thing to go down, considering what we've done in our hour and 10 minutes of looking up force majeure clauses and what, the difficulty in enforcement for that. So, I mean, there's something that's not here.
It feels like there's an element that's not included here. Doug Robertson at the AJC, Atlanta United players did not show up for Monday voluntary training session at 8 a.m. Recapped the tweet from Hercules Gomez, recapped the approval of the counter proposal from the MLSPA, the differences between 8.5 or 7.5% of a pay cut, the escape clause, and Doug calls it an escape clause in the CBA if 5 teams suffer an attendance decrease of 25% from the previous year. And MLSPA didn't include that stipulation according to ESPN. I'm reading from Doug's article. That's not the way I read the ESPN article. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if the MLSPA did not include a force majeure clause. But an escape clause and a force majeure clause are two very different things.
Yeah, that's two different things.
They're not the same thing. If it is an escape clause and not a force majeure clause, we're having a completely different conversation. But It has not been worded that way in other places. So, again, this is where we're trying to connect all these dots and make sense of it. And it's hard to because things are being said differently in different places. Force majeure is a very specific thing. It's not it's not just a blanket escape clause. If this is an escape clause for that, again, it didn't happen last year. It hasn't happened, I don't think, ever in league history. But that's a different conversation than a force majeure clause, which doesn't seem to hold up if it is just tied to an attendance drop.
Yeah. Yeah, Carlisle force majeure and Doug is saying escape. Those are two entirely different things.
Yeah, and that's a very important distinction. Depending on which one it is, we're having two different conversations.
Yeah,
we're having some very different conversations.
Yeah. We have folks with questions. Would you like for me to thank somebody first before we get into the Twitter?
Yes, please thank our good friend Steve Apolinski and let him know we appreciate him.
Thanks, Steve Apolinski. First time, long time. Love the show. Apolinski & Associates, LLC, proud sponsors of everything soccer down here in the SDH network. Can reach out to them a couple of different ways. 404-377-9191. Get your free consultation by giving him a ring. Reach out to him on email. Steve, S-T-E-V-E, at aa-legal.com. aa-legal.com is the major website where you can take a peek at things. You know what happens, Jason, when you hit aa-legal.com?
What happens?
Low right-hand corner, there's a pop-up window. It's a conversation, an instant live chat with somebody if you've got questions. Low right-hand corner at aa-legal.com, 24/7, 365. Over 30 years of experience, over $40 million in judgments for their clients. Wrongful death, serious injury in Georgia and Alabama. Recognized as Legal Elite by Georgia Trend Magazine, one of the top 100 lawyers here in the state of Georgia. aa-legal.com, Apolinski & Associates, proud supporters of everything soccer down here and the SDH networks. Ta-da.
Nicely done. All right, what are people asking questions about, and we will try to fake our way through some answers at this point.
Well, the bazillion-dollar question comes from Shiva. What are the long-term consequences if there is a lockout? This league and the sport was about to take a huge turn in this country.
On top of a pandemic where you're losing minimum 70% of your revenue, it's going to make owners question continuing in a long term. And that's why I don't think it makes sense to lock out over the things we're talking about. It doesn't make sense. That's why it comes out of nowhere. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If they are this close on these things, what are we missing? Is it just we want an answer by Tuesday, which is how it's been reported, is we want an answer by Tuesday or you're being locked out. Well, probably could have handled that a little bit differently if these are the issues that are the problem. It doesn't seem to be the threat that's necessary at this point. And it's a shame that it's there, because it does hurt the perception of the league that I think has handled this really, really well and tried to move forward. You need to fix it. Need to fix it, because if it is as simple as the issues that we've laid out, it doesn't really make much sense that we are at this point. If we're talking 1 to 1.25% of a pay cut, if we're talking 7% in 1 year of growth on a media rights deal, those things are not the holdups. If it is the force majeure clause, we need more information to talk about it, because if it is a force majeure clause that is a true force majeure clause and an element of invoking it is an attendance drop, it's a very different conversation than the way Doug wrote it, and it's an escape clause that can be activated in the case of an attendance drop in 5 teams of 25%, which, again, is not typical. So those are two different conversations, but I can't see it being because of the pay cut. I can't see it being because of the media rights improvement in 1 year. It's got to be based around the force majeure clause, and I don't know if we have all the information.
Yeah.
I don't know. And again, it's harder because we've never had this as part of the CBA, so you're bringing something new into it, and it has to be defined very clearly.
Turner Kirby says, and he's dealing with a couple of sports. He says, I think a lockout would be terrible for MLB, but since they have a group of people that love the game so much, silently raise his hand, plus history, plus being the best league for the sport in the world, it won't be catastrophic. A lockout for MLS has the potential to be catastrophic. Everything you've built to try to get the reputation of the league among the best can go right down the drain if you can't figure this out, while 4 out of the big 5 can. Here's an idea, in all caps, scrap Orlando. Every state with a team has opened up for pro sports without fans, and one saying they can have them. And even if the Bay Area doesn't, San Jose can play somewhere else. Why force teams to potentially infect themselves by leaving their home market for a month?
Well, that's a whole different conversation, and that doesn't seem to be part of the problem at all. So we got to be clear. The Orlando plan does not seem to be the hang-up. As the Players Association said, they have agreed to the Orlando return to play. I think there's still some things about the safety issues that are being worked through, but not anything to stop the deal. They've agreed to the Orlando plan. That's not the hang-up. The hang-up has to be this force majeure clause. So could you hold on and wait and play games in markets? You could. I don't know if that's going to be possible in a few weeks. Look, you can't run from it. There's the potential, and that's the key word, of more problems with coronavirus because of what we've seen over the last weekend with protests, with people not social distancing, with a lot of people wearing masks, but not everybody. There is potential for it, and it's something that, look, you have to be worried about. It's real. Could that change the idea of being able to play in markets and what happens? It could. We don't know yet. There's no way to know. We have to wait and see. And it's hard to make plans on wait and see. The league, the players have agreed to the Orlando deal. That's not what's holding it up. I do agree with Turner. A lockout at this point that, now let me make it very clear. A lockout that prevents MLS from coming back. That's catastrophic. A negotiation that takes a turn and gets resolved, and you miss a week, you miss 2 weeks of a restart when nobody's playing right now, is not catastrophic. It's not good. It's not catastrophic. It's not good at all. MLS has handled this well, and they're doing damage to that because they've handled it well, and they've tried to find the way forward. And they are committing to be the league in the United States that will have the largest amount of losses on a percentage basis from missing fans in the stands. That's a fact. They're committing to play when financially it's going to be a huge loss. Period. There's just no way around it. That's why none of this makes sense that it has turned the way that it has. And that's why they need to talk through it and get it done. And hopefully, with the strong moves both ways, a threat of a lockout when it doesn't seem like it was necessary, not going to voluntary training today, which is a response to the lockout that didn't seem, the lockout threat that didn't seem necessary. Hopefully, today is getting this deal done and working forward, because neither side is going to benefit from where they are right now. period. Could some players be able to break contracts if there's a lockout and go play in other countries? Yeah. How many countries are going to have a bunch of money to spend, as we've talked about? What are the new contracts going to look like? They're not going to be great. Like this is a reality. So nobody is going to benefit from where things stand right now. Get it done. If you're not training this morning because of this, if the league has absolutely miscalculated their approach, and now they're getting a very painful slap in the face for it, fix it. Fix it and move on, because these issues do seem resolvable. Even the force majeure clause, we just don't have all the information. It's got to be better clarified. I'm looking back at attendance drops the prior year, so 2018 versus 17, and there's I'm looking for bad numbers. There's a 12% drop for the Red Bulls in their Supporter Shield winning year. That tells you a lot. There's a 15% drop for the Chicago Fire, which was a big one, which they were an awful team. And a 19% drop for the Columbus Crew, which was threatening leaving the city.
Yeah.
There were 3 double-digit drops in the league from 2017 to 18. When we're talking about this issue with attendance drops, and it can be this and it can be that, and this is why they're going to do it and they're going to invoke it. I don't have all the percentages from all the teams. I'm looking at raw numbers. There is not a year where you had 5 teams, or the percentage of 5 teams in a 26-team league and a 28-team league that you're going to go forward to, versus what you've had in previous years where you had a 10-team league, a 12-team league. You just don't have those. Like, they're not there. And some of the bigger numbers that are there are because of moves from big venues to smaller soccer-specific venues, which everybody wanted to see. Have there been 25% drops? I think there's a few. I mean, I'm looking right now without doing the math. The Galaxy 96 to 97, which is, I mean, different time period for this league, went from 28.9 to 26 to 20,626. Probably a 25% drop. Metro Stars in 96 went from 23,898 to 16,889. Okay. They have not had a 25% drop since. There's a 15.9 to 12.7 from 2008 to 9. Okay? The Galaxy had that one from year 1 of the league to year 2.
29%.
29%, which that's year 1 to year 2 of the league. It's a long time ago, 25 years ago. You don't have another one that is in that ballpark. You have a less than 4,000 drop from 2005 to 6. Colorado, you have a about 3,900 drop from 2002 to 2003, from 20,000 to 16. That's not a 25% drop, not quite. You don't have another one in Colorado. Columbus, the biggest raw drop was, I think was that one from 15.4 to 12.4, so 3,000. No, you had 39. You had 3,900 from 96 to 97. What? 12
to 15, or 15 down to 12 is 20%.
Yeah, no, we had that one.
Right.
Dallas went from 16 to 9 in year 1 to year 2 of the league. Beyond that, 2003 from 2002 was a huge drop in Dallas. That might have been the year where they left the Cotton Bowl and went to the high school stadium, which was a stupid move all the way around. So it's a little more understandable. Still stupid. Don't have another huge drop that way. DC, you don't have a huge drop that way. I mean, there's not a bunch of 25% drops in league history, first off. That's another element of this. It's, you hear that and it's like, oh my God, this is a horrible threat and this happens all the time. doesn't. It's not there. And I don't think it's any motivation for the league to uncook numbers, if numbers are so cooked, to try to be able to break a contract, because you're basically kicking yourself in the groin from a PR standpoint. Why? The benefit of breaking the contract doesn't match the damage you're going to do to your long-term reputation of saying, we can't draw anybody. Like, something's not clicking here.
Yeah. Tafka says 5 at 25% is super unlikely. I recognize that to start, but it still doesn't sit well for the purpose of the clause in general. It's about impossibility of performance, not attendance. If you
Exactly. Exactly. That's why I don't know if Doug's wording of an escape clause, if it had that, okay. That's not a force majeure clause. If it's a force majeure clause, it can't just be tied to attendance, can it?
Yeah, see, the number is tied to the number. To me, what we're hearing here, the force majeure and the attendance number. The attendance number brings down something like you would attach to an escape clause, not something you would attach to a force majeure. And I think that there's something. Once again, I will continue to maintain there's something that we're missing here. If they're dead set on having this attached to a force majeure clause, we're missing a piece of information.
Yeah, big time. And I think we're then getting these other elements that also don't line up. I mean, Tafka's right. I mean, we've been talking about it. The likelihood of 5 teams having a 25% drop is just not there. It's not likely. It hasn't happened in league history. It's not likely. Could it happen? Yeah. Why would it happen? Probably in the case of something like this. It just doesn't add up. None of this is adding up right now for me. And again, maybe it's just because I'm biased about it and I want to see MLS come back and I'm wanting both sides to get it done.
But you're also looking at it empirically.
I'm trying to.
Over the last 30 minutes, we've been analyzing clauses in contracts, their possibilities, and trying to give empirical evidence as to why this doesn't match the conversation. And Tafka has also said that his concern is that as attendance grows with league improvement, which many teams have substantial room to improve, then the percentile drops could grow in size as well.
I'm reading a little bit about the NBA part of it.
Okay.
Sorry, Tafka. I mean, we're all trying to figure this out. Thank you for your help with us.
Yes.
So there's a piece over at Forbes from Brian Toporek, who is a senior contributor in the sports money part. And this was from March 13th. This was at the very beginning of the conversation. So this was when there was a lot unknown about coronavirus and its effect, which is actually kind of good for actually just getting into what the force majeure clause allows you to do.
Right.
Okay. If the NBA cannot, quote, perform its obligations, unquote, due to a, quote, force majeure event, unquote, which includes epidemics, in their CBA, players would lose 192.6th of their salary for each missed game that cannot be rescheduled. So if you trigger the force majeure, you can start deducting that percentage of their salary for each game. Basically a game check for games that are missed. You cannot pay them for those games. That's in the NBA CBA. As of now, this was at the very beginning of it, there was no discussion about triggering the provision because they were hoping to come back to play. From the article, a force majeure clause also gives the NBA, quote, the right to terminate, unquote, the collective bargaining agreement 60 days after delivering a written notice of termination to the NBAPA. The NBA would have to submit that written notice within 60 days of the force majeure event. although there's no indication that such a move is under consideration back in mid-March. Michael McCann at Sports Illustrated noted, the NBA CBA did not define, quote, the necessary elements or circumstances for an epidemic to exist. So at this point, there was a question in mid-March if the coronavirus outbreak would even meet it. I think now, obviously, it would. So that, according to McCann at Sports Illustrated, when it was upgraded to a pandemic by the World Health Organization, that might allow the NBA to, quote, contend that COVID-19 qualifies as an epidemic and teams can withhold pay for games missed. So, again, in the NBA CBA, there are triggers not related to attendance that you have to meet to then use the force majeure clause. That's reasonable. That seems to make sense. And even at this point, the NBA was saying, we're not going to do that because it's not worth doing it. It's not worth poisoning the relationship. It's not worth doing this, even with the losses facing all those kinds of things. And they have not. And I think now they're outside of the 60 days from the beginning of the force majeure event that they could do it. So, I mean, could you argue, quibble about days? Probably, but it doesn't even seem like it's on the table. That's why if this is a force majeure, a true force majeure, it doesn't make sense that it would only be tied to an attendance drop. That doesn't seem to be what a force majeure clause is. If that is a component of it that allows you to trigger it in the event of these other things, we're still having a very different conversation. So we're having a conversation about an event that has never happened in MLS history in terms of that many teams having that kind of a drop, or if it did, it was year 1 to year 2 of the league's history. It hasn't happened in recent years, more than a 20% drop in attendance. So we're talking about something like that period, but we're also talking about that in the context of a force majeure clause, which has other elements in play. This is where we're missing some information, some very, very important information that is part of this negotiation. And if the sides are not defining this, they need to now, because that has to be handled. And you've got things to base it on. If the NBA has this language in their CBA, and I mean, I was able to find some of it pretty fast. I'm sure you can find it. That should be where you start from. If the MLSPA is agreeing to a force majeure, you're probably going to use some of this kind of language. If, something meets the standard of an epidemic or a act of war or whatever could trigger it, it's that, not an attendance drop.
Let me give you another state's interpretation of it. And
okay.
let me get your opinion here.
One state,
and I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you which one.
Oh, now I'm scared. I'm not going to guess.
No, but I'll tell you after the fact. In one state's law, there is an implied duty. There has to be an implied duty on the claiming party to make an effort to attempt to resolve the event causing delay or inability to perform under the contract before invoking force majeure. Mm-hmm. This duty is, quote, related to the duty of good faith and is read into all express contracts unless waived, end quote.
I don't think an attendance drop would meet any of that. Even that one.
Then the state of Illinois would have an issue.
Yeah. Okay. I've got the NBA CBA.
Okay.
And I'll read you. It's 39.5 in the CBA. Force majeure event. This is A. Force majeure event shall mean the occurrence of any of the following events or conditions, provided that such event or condition either 1. Makes it impossible for the NBA to perform its obligations under this agreement, or 2. Frustrates the underlying purpose of this agreement, or 3. Makes it economically impracticable for the NBA to perform its obligations under this agreement. And these are the events and conditions. Wars or warlike action whether actual or threatened, and whether conventional or other, including but not limited to chemical or biological wars or warlike action.
Right.
Sabotage, terrorism, or threats of sabotage or terrorism, explosions, epidemics, weather or natural disasters, including but not limited to fires, floods, droughts, hurricanes, tornadoes, storms, or earthquakes, and any governmental order or action, civil or military, provided, however, that none of the foregoing enumerated events or conditions is within the reasonable control of the NBA or an NBA team. That's pretty strong in terms of defining what can trigger a force majeure clause being invoked, a force majeure event. Section B, in addition to any other rights a team or the NBA may have by contract or by law, if a force majeure event occurs and as a result one or more teams are unable to play one or more games, whether exhibition, regular season, or playoff, then for each missed exhibition, regular season, or playoff game during such period that was not rescheduled and replayed, the compensation payable to each player who was on the roster of a team that was unable to play one or more games during the force majeure period shall be reduced by 192.6th of the player's compensation for the season covering the force majeure period. Basically, they're taking the 82-game regular season, they're adding 10.6 more things to divide the salary by. So they're assuming that all players are going to play or have the opportunity to play in 10 exhibition games and 82 games in the regular season. That's why that number is there, just for clarification. They actually define it, why it's 92.6, sorry. 5 exhibition games, 82 regular season games, and 5.6 playoff games during each season. That's the numbers they are using. So this is very well defined. This is not a clause that's just randomly thrown into a contract willy-nilly here. Okay? That needs to be understood. In the NBA one, they're allowed to do that, reduce the salary by the 192.6th of the compensation, if a qualifying force majeure event occurs. And then the way they can do that, and it's only 4 sections to the force majeure section here in the CBA. Section D. Well, Section C, let me make sure there's nothing important here. The applicable compensation reduction from each team shall be withheld by the player's team from the first compensation payment that is due or to become due to such player following the commencement of the force majeure period, which we'll get to in a second. So they withhold the money that they would have paid out if they hit the qualifying force majeure event. And then it gets into if the player moves teams, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that doesn't really matter to us. All right, Section D. Upon the occurrence of a force majeure event satisfying the terms of Section 5A above, the NBA shall have the right to terminate this agreement as of the 60th day following delivery to the Players Association of a written notice of termination, which must be delivered to the Players Association within 60 days of the force majeure event. During the 60-day period following delivery of such written notice of termination, the NBA and the Players Association shall engage in good faith negotiations for the purpose of entering into a successor agreement, and during such period the provisions of Article 30 shall remain in full force and effect. So let's again clarify, because some of the reporting that we cited earlier is incorrect. It's not the ability, once you say, we have had a force majeure event, we are telling you we've had a force majeure event, that it's all null and void. No. It is, you have a force majeure event, and this is the NBA again. You have a force majeure event. You are notifying the NBAPA that you feel like you have met a force majeure event that qualifies. That could go to arbitration, I would assume.
Yeah.
If that is agreed that, yes, this is a force majeure event that qualifies under the agreement, then there is a 60-day period of negotiation to enter into a successor agreement in light of the force majeure event. That's the NBA CBA. Now, does it make sense to you that there would be subtract 80% of that and just say that a force majeure clause is if 5 teams have a 25% drop of attendance, period? Like, that doesn't even make sense.
No.
It's got to be tied to something, which absolutely qualifies it in terms of people being outraged.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, in my opinion, would need that last element of this. That is a very important element. If you meet a force majeure event and you have whatever attendance drop or whatever else, which would only happen at the end of a season, I would assume, then you would have to go into a period to negotiate a new CBA. You wouldn't just be able to say, well, here's the contract, we're ripping it up.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot more to this than is being talked about, and it's a little frustrating where we're at the moment, because people are pissed off about the threat of a lockout, and I don't like it. But the force majeure clause element is far more complicated than it's being portrayed.
Yeah, and because basically this is being presented as this is it, it's done, and out the door, where the NBA version is, okay, and if you applied it to the current situation, if you took the date that the president declared pandemic March 13, so then you'd go, May 13 would be your 60 days. Then, in theory, you would sit there in mid-May, a couple weeks ago, okay, we have an event, now we go into discussions to figure out what our next steps are. We're going to activate the clause, then we're going to come up with a new agreement. All of this would have had a 60-day plus buildup here, where with what we're seeing out of MLS, the way it's being reported is that it's just being chopped off a cliff like it's Wile E. Coyote chasing after the Roadrunner. He's missed, the cliff is gone, and Wile E. Coyote drops into the canyon. There's something here that isn't here.
Yeah, something's not adding up. I hope we get some more information. Jeff Antonella was just retweeted by Paul Tenorio. Paul Tenorio, 3 hours ago, tweeted, "Great reporting from ESPN." This is Jeff Carlisle's piece that we've talked about. "Reminder, MLS and the MLSPA already agreed to terms on a CBA. MLS owners are effectively leveraging a global pandemic to insert drastic new terms into an already negotiated CBA or else not pay the players." Even the reporting that's out there, I don't agree with the way that's being worded at all. He says, "Not about a pay cut, not about Orlando." Jeff Attinella tweeted in a quote tweet, he said, "Don't forget about healthcare," right, which is a completely different element that has not been talked about. And Jeff Attinella is a player, as a part of the Players Association, who would know about that element. So, I don't know. Again, maybe I missed the memo that there's more to this than is being reported, and it's just not being talked about. But what's being reported and what's out there does not seem to line up with the discussion that is being had. Nope. MLS owners are effectively leveraging a global pandemic to insert drastic new terms into an already negotiated CBA or else not pay the players. If it's not about the pay cut, if it's not about Orlando, then it's two things. The force majeure clause, which they have not had in the past, which I think you've seen you might need because we're having a pandemic. Mm-hmm. Or it's the 7% difference on the rights deal improvement, and I don't think that's it either. I mean, could that be a negotiating point? Absolutely. But is that what's causing this? It doesn't seem to match up. It's got to be related to the force majeure clause, which, if you don't have it in there, you probably should have had it in there. And now you need to have it in there. And it sounds like both, unless I'm misreading Carlisle's reporting, the players do not want it in there, period. And the league does, and they want it tied to the attendance thing. There's a lot of questions about that sentence, that element of this. Is it one side wants a force majeure clause and one doesn't? Is it both sides agree to a force majeure clause, but they disagree over the triggers for it or the effects of it, which we have not heard any reporting on.
Right.
What is it exactly? And now, Jeff Attinella, is it related to other things like healthcare?
Yeah.
Don't know.
Once again, here's the sentence as it was written by Carlisle. MLS's proposal gives it the right to invoke the clause if 5 teams suffer an attendance drop of 25% or more from the previous year, while the MLSPA's doesn't have that stipulation. That's the sentence.
Doesn't have that stipulation.
Yeah.
The MLSPA counter proposal doesn't have the
attendance drop.
Well, that's how I read it too.
Yeah.
But could you read it as it doesn't have the force majeure stipulation?
Yeah.
Maybe.
See, we've got to have a better modifier here, and my mother, the English major, probably would destroy this paragraph. It's like, all right, where does your modifier fit? Does it fit the attendance stipulation, or does it fit the force majeure clause stipulation or the escape clauses stipulation, whatever this actually is? So there's a modifier here that can go in a bunch of different directions, and I know we're parsing the English language, but in a discussion over contracts, you've got to.
Yeah, because you've got to, because things are being pushed out there that are slanted a little bit in this conversation if we're missing some of these elements. I want to know what the healthcare stipulations of the discussions are. I would hope that the league would not be changing anything about whatever healthcare it has offered for players or whatever situation that is. That would not seem to fit dealing with a global pandemic. That would not seem to be the right approach at all. That would be a huge element. And that has not been talked about outside of Jeff Attinella's tweet, quote tweeting Paul Tenorio. They need to know what's going on there. Mm-hmm. The other stuff outside of the force majeure, I think, are resolvable. The force majeure element, I don't know what the problem is and how it needs to be resolved. I do know that the tweeting of getting people riled up and angry at the league, it's not going to help the situation, although it doesn't really matter because fans are not negotiating the CBA. The back and forth when it gets public with players and the league is not going to help the situation. We've seen this go down in other places. We need to work through this now. Now is the breaking point. Fix it. Move on. That's what the league needs. That's what the players need. That's what everybody needs. Figure it out. You know, the conversation about a force majeure clause right now, yes, during a global pandemic, it's what they're there for. That's why you have them. Read the language from the NBA CBA about a global pandemic. Like, it's part of the whole reasoning for having it. The fact that it was not part of it before is an oversight on everybody's part. Everybody. The players aren't going to push for it because it gives the owners an out. It has a whole bunch of restrictions, obviously, because it's things outside of the owner's control. And we're going on the NBA force majeure clause, by the way. Make sure that's clear. It's not just willy-nilly thrown in there like, yeah, we can break the contract. The NBA one has a ton of different elements to it. I would hope that this one does too. If it doesn't, it needs it. Because it's not as easy as just you have 5 teams have an attendance drop, which again has not happened in the last 2 years. You haven't had one who had more than a 19% attendance drop. But just to have that in there outside of nothing doesn't match up with everything. I think Attinella tweeting about healthcare is probably a more important development here. These are the elements that would be critical. If there are elements, and maybe it's tied to the force majeure clause, maybe it's not, that would affect healthcare for players, then that's a very different conversation. Because then you're affecting family members, wives, partners. Then you're affecting kids. Then you're affecting different things. And the players are going to fight for that as they should. That's a very different conversation than what we've had a lot of this morning about a clause that in every instance we've seen it is incredibly restrictive. and not able to just be implemented over an attendance drop outside of nothing else.
The more that we've gone through this morning, the more this sounds the escape clause route and not a force majeure clause, even though it is being regarded by Carlisle and others as a force majeure. This sounds like an escape.
Yeah, which is not a force majeure clause.
No. And that's
maybe the language has been lost somewhere in it. Doug called it an escape clause, but he cited the ESPN article. So that's where it's not a synonym necessarily, and that's where it's a little confusing.
Yeah.
It has been reported as a force majeure conversation pretty widely, pretty consistently for a while now.
Yeah.
And that's a different conversation than an escape clause. So I don't know. If it's an escape clause not related to anything else, just tied to attendance, it is still unlikely. It doesn't really fit with any other CBA that we've talked about. If it is truly a force majeure clause, then it is a different thing entirely. And I don't know.
What else is on your mind? We're caught up on the Twitters.
I don't know. I really don't know. I hope that they're able to sort this stuff out. They need to ASAP, now, and not have this get worse and not have a bunch of tweets fired off and not have a bunch of ill will created. It needs to get sorted out now. You've got today to sort it out. If there's some kind of deadline for tomorrow to lock people out, well, the players didn't show up for training today, so you're already there. Don't care what deadline you have. Figure it out and move forward for the good of everybody involved. It's a tough situation. You're looking at losses that you would have never planned for as clubs. It's a fact. You can say that the owners have the money. You can say that they're rich. You can say whatever. You're looking at losses that nobody planned for, period. It's real. There's no way around it. How do you figure this out and move forward together, take advantage of some of the opportunities that could come from this? Because I do think MLS is positioned to bounce back faster than anybody else. I do think they can do better at this than anything else, and they have up to this point. This is a huge setback for that. They got to fix it. Both sides got to fix this. It doesn't do anybody any good to have a lockout and miss time. It doesn't do anybody any good to have a lockout and create a bunch of ill will. It doesn't do anybody any good to be having this going on right now. Figure it out and move forward as you have done in the past, working together. Because it's the only way this league grows. It's the only way the players grow. It's the only way any of this happens. Other news today at noon on CBS Sports HQ. They're doing the draw for the NWSL Challenge Cup. It's Lisa Baird, the commissioner, will be doing it. All teams will be chosen for spots 1 through 9, which will put them into their groups to play games. 12 p.m. live draw, CBS Sports HQ, which is just the website, I believe.
Yeah, that's their online sports channel.
Okay. So you don't need to be subscribed to CBS All Access. It's just at cbssports.com/live. Okay. So that's NWSL. Really quick, because we're up against it and things keep popping off. In Italy, they're talking about potentially looking at 10% to 25% of the capacity being opened at some point. Mid-July is what Andrea Agnelli of Juventus is talking about. Poland, Russia, Serbia are already planning on letting some fans in from June. Spain, Bulgaria, Portugal are working on similar proposals. Hungary is also in the letting some fans in now element. I don't know where things stand in Italy. It feels aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
It is about money, no question about it. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to work or not. Also in Italy, Mario Balotelli skipped another training session, and Brescia's president, Massimo Cellino, is considering releasing him from his contract, which it sounds like he's trying to make happen anyway.
Yeah.
So the Balotelli sweepstakes will be back in play. We mentioned Spain. They're set for their June 11th restart. Odion Ighalo from Manchester United will stay with Manchester United. They extended the loan to the end of January in 2021. Sky Sports had an interesting one, and we'll see if there's more details about it today. The majority of teams in the bottom half of the Premier League want relegation scrapped if the season has to be curtailed due to the pandemic. So not if they come back and finish it, if it doesn't finish. That's the conversation. And of course the bottom half of the Premier League would want that to happen because they don't want to get relegated. That's kind of a duh. We'll see if there's more details from it. There's also talk about the FA Cup final being played in front of 20,000 fans, according to the Sunday Supplement. Okay. That'd be August 1st at Wembley. 10,000 fans from each club could be present. Wembley has the space, but I don't know about the logistics of that.
Yeah.
Newcastle reports on their finances came out. Chronicle Live, Lee Ryder has them. They showed a profit over the last 12 months of £34.7 million. That sounds great, doesn't it? Sounds wonderful. They have on their books a $111 million pound or £100 million interest-free loan that they owe owner Mike Ashley.
Of course.
He owns the team, but he loaned the team £111 million, and they showed a profit, but they have $100 million negative over here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Ashley has turned down the opportunity on many occasions to explain his logic in the loan to the Chronicle Live. So, yeah. And question, is Newcastle, a club that now faces months without gate revenue and owes TV money to broadcasters, still worth £300 million? And they're also assuming that that price tag includes the loans from Ashley that he would get back. Maybe that's why it's put that way. Things that make you go, CNC Music Factory. QPR chief exec Lee Hoos is appalled by and vehemently opposed to the championship coming back on June 20th. That was announced yesterday. Hoos says on QPR's website, incredibly, there has been absolutely no consultation with individual clubs, nor with the Championship Doctors Working Group by the divisional representatives or anyone else in the Football League regarding this matter. Wow, that doesn't seem very smart. Players have not returned to full contact training yet. He has a question about them being able to play competitively in 3 weeks. He says he's not a lone voice in the matter. Players have been back in training at the championship since May 25th, so it would be less than a month of any training to get back on the field. And then the calendar was incredibly aggressive, too. It was like 2 games a week to finish the season and the playoffs. None of it made sense. And they announced it without talking to the clubs? Like, yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah. Mark Warburton, the manager of QPR, to get caught blindsided last night, quoting him, 40 minutes before the public are told is just inappropriate. We're all for finishing the campaign, but give us the time to prepare the players to avoid the injury risk. We have to make sure we avoid the medical chaos in the injury room. Now suddenly last night, without any consultation, we get told that we're starting in less than 3 weeks, which I just find to be ludicrous.
Yeah. The no consultation element's just crazy talk. That makes absolutely no sense at all and is stupid, reckless. Stupid, reckless. Speaking of stupid, let's go to Scotland real quick. Maybe not so stupid at the moment. James Anderson is an investor. He oversees a portfolio of interest at Baillie Gifford. Just running through it real quick. The trust that he controls is worth almost £10 billion. £850 million investment in Amazon. £800 million investment in Tesla. £600 million investment in Alibaba, Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba, £250 million in Ferrari, £50 million in Facebook, £300 million in Netflix, £160 million in Spotify. I mean, good grief.
It's all right.
Yeah. He has pledged to make a multi-million-pound donation to the SPFL and its member clubs to see them through the worst of the COVID-19 crisis. He and other wealthy backers have already gifted £9 million to Hearts over the last 7 years. That started with the shirt sponsorship for Save the Children that went on the front of the shirt. He paid for that. He didn't want that to be a public thing, which, I mean, he's putting a charity on the front of the shirt. There's not a lot to complain about here. And yes, he's helping Hearts, who doesn't have any money. Okay, there's not a lot to be upset about here. However, and this is from the article at the Daily Record, however, Anderson and Hearts chairman Ann Budge, who brought him to the SPFL's table, are at pains to point out his donation is no clumsy inducement to ensure the Tynecastle Club are still playing in the Premiership. It's not tied to the reconstruction. It is tied to nothing. It's tied to a donation of helping these clubs deal with the situation they're in. Now, something I had not heard, the Daily Record says CVC Capital Partners and Blackstone BX are reportedly ready to bid around £2 billion for a 20% stake in the SPFL. One source told the Daily Record categorically that is not in the plans of James Anderson or Bailey Gifford. This is purely a donation from a philanthropist keen to help Scottish football through the most challenging period in its history. Seems like a no-brainer to me. Mm-hmm. Don't know what strings are attached to the donation, but it is not a 20% stake in the league. It's not a purchase. It is a donation of money to a league that desperately needs it. Don't be stupid. Figure it out and get it done. I don't care if it came from somebody who's helped Hearts. Don't play the, Hearts said it, so we hate them, so we can't do this.
Stop. We don't want it because Hearts took money already.
Yeah. Figure it out and take somebody's help if they're trying to help. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's all I got. It's been a long weekend. It's potentially going to be a long week. Look out for one another, y'all. Try to bring good in whatever circle you got. That's all we can do right now. And hopefully things will change in the MLS front, because I know all of us listening to this and all of us involved in it are hopeful that we have something else going on and live soccer in this country, and especially with teams, and not everybody that listens is an Atlanta United fan, but teams that we all care about and want to see active, and players that we all care about that we want to see active and continue to get paid as they have been, and when clubs that mean something to us, and we all want to see this move forward. So do what you can on a personal front to make the world a better place. Cross your fingers for MLS and hope that they get over their issues at the moment and move forward. And hopefully we've got some better news for you tomorrow. Fingers crossed, y'all. Mucha plata.
Mucha plata, y'all.